Kanse, welcome to APTN National News. I'm Mashkode. Thank you for joining us. We begin in Manitoba, where the Winnipeg Police Service are set to hold a press conference to confirm the identity of Mashkode Bizhiki'ikwe, or Buffalo Woman. She is one of 4 Indigenous women killed by a serial killer who is now serving life in prison for 4 first-degree murder charges. With more on that, our TR Wheatley joins us live, and a warning to our viewers to watch with care, as some details may be disturbing. Thanks, TR. What do we know about the details that are expected to come out this afternoon?
Yeah, thanks, Creason. So right now, police aren't saying much. Up until now, we really only knew of a baby fat jacket being connected to Buffalo Woman. But multiple sources have told us at APTN that Buffalo Woman is Ashley Christine Shingus. Ashley is 31 years old from the St. Teresa Indigenous Nation. She was last seen in the downtown near the vicinity around the Salvation Army on March 11, 2022. Ashley, of course, she's a mother of 3 and was very much loved by her family. While most of her family lives up north, they've often come down to conduct searches. You know, in January 2023, her father, Albert Shingus, told APTN that he had submitted DNA for Buffalo Woman, but a month later, police told the public that Ashley wasn't Buffalo Woman at that time. Now, that jacket, we learned over the course of the trial of the man responsible for her killing, had sold it over Facebook Marketplace.
And TR, do we know who we expect to hear from this announcement?
Yeah, so basically what we know is that Rebecca Contois, Morgan Harris, Mercedes Myron, and Buffalo Woman were all brutally murdered in the spring of 2022 by serial killer Jeremy Skibitsky. It's believed that Buffalo Woman was his first victim. Last year, he was sentenced to life in prison, where the court revealed the serial killer preyed on vulnerable First Nations women at homeless shelters. Now, originally he was charged with just Contois' murder, but after being interrogated by the WPS, he revealed the other 3 women. You know, amidst all of this news, it was revealed that each of these women had ended up in landfills. This, of course, sparked a 2-year fight to search the landfill, as police originally had said they would not. You know, after much political fighting and all that search finally began in December last year. And after just 3 months, the remains of Harris and Myron have been confirmed to have been found in that private landfill.
And this Winnipeg Police Service announcement today, TR, who is expected to speak today?
So what we do know is that, you know, the Premier Wab Kinew is expected to speak at this conference, as well as the Mayor of Winnipeg, Scott Gillingham. Also, the Assembly of Manitoba Chief's Grand Chief, Kyra Wilson, will be in attendance, as well as the St. Teresa Point Indigenous Nation Chief, Raymond Flett. Also expected to speak is the newly appointed Chief Gene Bowers, who already began his commitment to fixing the relationship between the Indigenous community and the police. Of course, there are also many longtime advocates and some families of MIWG that will also be attending. You know, we will have the presser live on our website and our YouTube page, and a report on our evening show with more details later, Creason.
Thanks again, TR. That was APTN's TR Wheatley live outside the Winnipeg Police Service building in downtown Winnipeg. And we'll have more on that story in our evening newscast, and you can read more at aptnnews.ca. And if you are affected by these stories, supports are always available 24/7 through the MMIWG support line. That number is 1-844-413-6649. A former self-proclaimed Indigenous healer who pleaded guilty to sexually assaulting his patients was back in court on Tuesday in Saskatoon for his sentencing hearing. CTV's Stacey Hine has the details.
63-year-old Cecil Wolfe leaves Saskatoon's Court of King's Bench after hearing emotional statements from the women he sexually assaulted. Last month, he pleaded guilty to a dozen counts of sexual assault while working as a self-proclaimed medicine man. Court heard Wolfe's 12 victims turned to him for traditional Indigenous treatment. According to the agreed statement of facts, He told them to wear skirts to their sessions. He would then inappropriately touch them. At Wolf's sentencing hearing, several victims shared how they no longer participate in Indigenous cultural practices because of Wolf's actions. One victim saying she lost faith in humanity the day she met Wolf. Court heard the women were afraid to speak out because of his status in the community. At the time, he was considered a respected elder who worked with the Saskatoon Tribal Council and White Buffalo Youth Lodge to perform traditional rituals and ceremonies.
The Crown says Wolf abused his position of trust and authority. It's seeking a prison sentence of 10 years and 9 months. The defense is seeking a sentence of 4 to 5 years. The judge has reserved his decision until April 23rd. Stacey Hine, CTV News, Saskatoon.
A northern BC Indigenous woman is speaking out after she was arrested by 2 RCMP officers during the early morning hours of Boxing Day in 2024 while attempting to withdraw money from an ATM. After celebrating Christmas with family, Sydney Tibbetts and her 2 cousins walked to the ATM in Fort St. James to withdraw some money at around 2:30 a.m. She said 2 RCMP officers approached them while inside the bank and asked them to leave because they were intoxicated. Tibbetts says at the time, no one was causing a disturbance to the public and they just wanted to use the ATM. A 2.5-minute video was recorded after the RCMP continued to refuse the 3 entry to the bank, with Tibbetts and her cousins accusing the officers of racism. An officer can then be seen grabbing Tibbetts' arm and arresting her with the other officer assisting. A short time later, Tibbetts was released with no charges. An officer dropped her off at her home and she instead walked on foot to a family member's home. Tibbetts says the arrest was unnecessary and now says she is suffering from physical and emotional trauma. In a statement to APTN News, RCMP Corporal Madonna Saunderson with BC RCMP's North District says, to respect an individual's privacy, we cannot confirm the name of any person arrested or the details surrounding the arrest until such time as charges have been laid. She encouraged anyone who may be subject to police misconduct to report it and closed by saying, I can confirm that detachment and district leadership have been engaged and offered the family specific information about the complaints process. Tibbetts says she will now pursue legal action against the RCMP. You can read more about this story by going over to our website at www.aptnnews.ca. A First Nation political organization is calling on the federal government to create an act to stop people from denying the harms caused by residential schools. The law would be similar to Bill C-19 that criminalized Holocaust denialism in Canada. APTN's Tina House has more on this story.
Since the late 1800s, thousands of Indigenous children from across Canada were forcibly removed from their homes and taken to residential schools. Once there, they were starved, beaten, sexually, verbally, and physically abused. If they tried to run away, they were brought back and punished. In many cases, parents did not even know where their children were. Many children never made it back home. In 2021, the Tk'emlúps Indian Band announced that 215 anomalies suspected to be unmarked graves were found. Since then, dozens of other communities from across Canada have also come forward with their own discoveries. Despite these discoveries and testimonies from survivors, there is a small but loud group that denies that unmarked graves even exist, or that residential schools were bad for Indigenous people. Angela White says this group needs to be educated and held accountable.
Once you start allowing voices to start spewing and changing the narratives of what our history truly is, you open the door to so many other negative voices that can just instill themselves and start changing those narratives.
White points to a recent video that shows BC Conservative MLA Dallas Brody mocking residential school survivors and claiming there are no unmarked graves.
I do know that if we don't have truth, not his truth, her truth, my grandmother's truth, or this whole thing about my truth and your truth, oh, my truth. This stuff has to stop. It's like, it's got to be the truth.
She wants people to shut up the survivors because their truth isn't worth anything in her eyes. That's, I think, really where what survivors are really talking about is enough is enough. Like the strong ones are coming forward and saying, this is my truth and I'm going to stick to it.
Hugh Breaker is with the First Nations Leadership Council, which is comprised of political leaders from across BC. They are calling on the federal government to enact legislation that would stop residential school denialism.
To me, it's sort of like an added insult to the people who suffered in residential school. It's like you're hitting them over the head again. These people put up with so much in their life, and now they're having to be called a liar.
Breaker has a message for anyone who denies residential schools were a dark part of Canada's history.
You've got to stop this because you're hurting people. You're hurting a lot of people, and you're making it difficult for us to bring up our children in a proper way, to make them proud of who they are.
Dallas Brody was kicked out of the Conservative Party after her comments went viral. Our request for an interview with her was not granted by the time this story went to air. Tina House, APTN National News, Vancouver.
On day 3 of the federal election campaign, Prime Minister Mark Carney stopped in Halifax at the Irving shipyard, where he promised more investment in Canada's military. Hundreds of Irving shipyard employees and Nova Scotia Liberal candidates stood behind the Prime Minister as he promised to rebuild, reinvest and rearm the military. This includes increased surveillance capabilities of the Canadian Coast Guard to protect Canada's sovereignty. APTN News asked Carney if he would support Indigenous sovereignty because 3 Mi'kmaq First Nations announced last week that they are sovereign nations, and community members will assert their inherent rights to fish without federal authorization.
What I support is dialogue which balances Aboriginal rights, the realities of the fishery that works towards a sustainable fishery here in Nova Scotia, throughout Atlantic Canada, across this country.
And we'll tell you more about those Mi'kmaq fishing rights a little later in our newscast. We now want to tell you about this week's new web poll question. Over on our website, we ask, which party do you think will best address issues facing First Nations, Inuit and Métis peoples? Your answers are the Liberals, the Conservatives, the NDP, or the Green Party, or none of the above. Have your say at www.aptnnews.ca. The web poll questions will be on the right side of the homepage. Mi'kmaq fishermen says they will not back down and follow new federal fishing rules. That story when we come back. Stay with us. Welcome back. The Alvers fishery opened this past Saturday in Nova Scotia. Mi'kmaq fishermen have said they will not follow rules that require them to use a federal app that logs the harvest of baby eels or alvers in the rivers in their territory. In a March 5th letter from Sebenegati, Member 2 and Millbrook First Nation, Chief Bob Glode told the Department of Fisheries and Oceans that his community will not use the app and that they do not recognize Ottawa's jurisdiction over the Mi'kmaq fishery. Glode referred to current treaties and multiple Supreme Court rulings that uphold Mi'kmaq fishing rights, including the 1999 Donald Marshall Jr. Court decision that allows Mi'kmaq communities to earn a moderate livelihood from fishing. That ruling also says Canada has the right to regulate fisheries for conservation reasons, but Chief Glode insists his community will run its own sovereign regulatory system and